Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. Speaking of foot traffic, David, you were going to talk about Apple Places.
One of your best segues, Greg. That was very good.
Yes.
So
Apple and Snap.
Apple and Snap. We saw two of the major players this week release, I would say, incremental improvements on previous products. Apple Maps Connect is no longer; it's now Places on Apple. So I don't know if that means that our friend Andrew Shotland is going to rebrand or redomain his website, but he did mention he was expecting to have to purchase more servers this week. So Apple reintroduced their sort of the portal through which you claim a location. I actually went through the process myself as David Mim Inc. I found it fairly disappointing from Apple's typical excellent user interface standards. I thought it was pretty limited. First of all, the information about my business was wrong. It was 7 years out of date. I don't recall ever claiming my previous location in Maps Connect, so they must have gotten it from an out-of-date data provider. I was unable to edit the information as part of the claiming process, which I found really interesting. And then there was a layer of manual verification even before, I basically had to say my Apple account is attached to this location, and that was all I could do. So I found it to be fairly unuser friendly, certainly relative to GMB. And Greg, to your point, it seems to be somewhat limited in terms of the granularity and types of businesses that they're accepting. There are only 1,600 business categories. Mike, I think the latest count on GMB is over 4,000.
Yeah, it's 4,200.
Something like that. So it's only about as third as granular as Google. There are no SABs, no service area businesses, according to Greg's write-up in the newsletter this week.
I couldn't see any evidence of that.
Yeah.
Well, there hasn't.
I do think that the one advantage that they have over Google is this sort of native, the potential for sort of native sharing and texting ability through iMessage, I think is a really compelling thing. And if you think about typically how you would share something on an iPhone, there is usually a big visual attached to that share. So I think visuals have the potential to be really important on Apple Places, even more so potentially than GMB. And so that was my sort of initial take on Apple Places. Glad to see they're continuing to or reinvesting in maps and local generally. Fairly disappointed in the initial effort as a small business user. So
just a note on the visuals. I spoke to a number of large platforms that deal with multi-locations, and these platforms all were asked by Apple to submit more real original photos for the location. So this is over the last 6 months. So clearly this is part and parcel of Apple's ongoing effort to upgrade what is the weakest part of their Maps product, business listings.
Well, to that point, Mike, I mean, I didn't go as deep as you did, David, into it, but I went into it a little bit. And I did, 15 searches for different businesses that I'm aware of in this area. Many of them restaurants, but not exclusively restaurants. And there were a surprising number that were not there. I mean, these are long established businesses that are local favorites, and just a lot of them weren't in that database, which is really kind of striking to me and strange.
Yeah, I think that clearly their current data is out of date. I think most business owners don't even necessarily think to claim, an Apple business location. I think that will change as the consumer side of a business owner starts to interact more and more with iMessage and that sort of thing with a larger database. So I think I don't think it's an insurmountable hurdle for Apple in the same way that it is for mapping platforms and local search engines with less consumer device market share, essentially. So I think that they can solve the data quality problem, at least in the high usage categories like restaurants, hospitality, et cetera. So,
well, there is a lot of good data out there, so it should be solvable. I mean, Anyway, go ahead.
One of the difficulties that Apple shoots himself in the foot in this matter, in terms of convincing small businesses to participate, is the lack of metrics about impact. And they've gone out of their way to make it difficult to figure out what that is, making call tracking numbers hard to use, that kind of thing. So they've done that themselves in terms of limiting their visibility in that marketplace. On another side note, I went to Vermont over the weekend, in the hills in the Green Mountains, and in this context, Apple Maps is vastly superior functioning as a map product than Google. Google does not do well when cell service is very spotty, unless you download the app ahead of time, which is impossible because it's too big or whatever, or the maps ahead of time. So Apple really stood out in this environment on these weird country roads where you didn't have a signal for a half hour. It did fine. So, which is interesting, is that there's
and
that.
I'm sure Apple would have done better than the other news item that I was going to bring up related, which is Snap Maps. I'm sure that there are not too many Snapchat videos from rural areas of Vermont that you wanted to maybe check out. But Greg, you highlighted this is sort of again, an incremental improvement on kind of what they had before. It does strike me as I always found Foursquare to be one of the most useful local search engines as a traveler in a new place. And it strikes me that Snap has probably a fairly similar audience of sort of young people in the know, where it might actually get me to consume Snap as a user, although I never see myself actually using it, posting video content, as an active user in that manner. So I think it has potential to me as a research tool, and potentially for folks in that sort of younger millennial and below demographic.
Yeah, young millennials and Gen Z, I think it's definitely something that they'll use to look for local recommendations, entertainment, restaurants, and that kind of thing. Both of my kids use the Snap Map, and I don't, but that's totally a generational thing. But I think this could be significant for businesses that are seeking to attract those populations, sort of entertainment venues and other kinds of businesses. So I think it's something to pay attention to. And we'll get some usage. I haven't tried it out, so I can't speak to that, how good it is. But I think it's an interesting thing. It's a shame. Foursquare is still around as a consumer application, but it's really, I don't know. It's probably on life support. I don't know how much they really invest in it at this point. And Dennis Crowley is essentially exiting the organization. So,
So that's what this strikes me as sort of the heir apparent maybe to that Foursquare experience.
Yeah. I think so. I think that analogy is right.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.